He was just a gravedigger, until he dug up a letter that wasn't meant to be found. He was just a gravedigger, until he dug up a letter that wasn't meant to be found. He was just a gravedigger, until he dug up a letter that wasn't meant to be found. Nobody could have predicted what happened next. Samuel Murphy had been digging graves for 23 years in the dusty cemetery outside Willowbrook, Texas. 23 years of sweat, dirt, and silence. But on this particular October morning in 1892, his shovel hit something that would change everything and expose a secret that could destroy the most powerful man in town. The sun was barely peeking over the rolling hills when Samuel arrived at the cemetery. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of sagebrush and distant wood smoke from the town's chimneys. His boots crunched on the frost-covered grass as he walked toward the plot where Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell was to be laid to rest that afternoon. Samuel was a man of routine. Every morning, same time, same path, same steady rhythm of his shovel breaking through the earth. The townspeople barely noticed him, just the quiet man who prepared their final resting places. He preferred it that way. After losing his wife Martha to fever 5 years earlier, Samuel found peace in the solitude of his work. But this morning felt different. The air seemed heavier somehow, charged with something he couldn't name. As he began digging Mrs. Hartwell's grave, something caught his eye. About 3 feet down, his shovel struck something that wasn't dirt or rock. It made a hollow wooden sound that echoed strangely in the morning stillness, a sound that seemed to carry 15 years of buried secrets. Samuel paused, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool air. He looked around the empty cemetery, making sure he was alone. The old oak trees creaked softly in the gentle breeze, their leaves rustling like whispered warnings. He knelt down and carefully brushed away the earth with his hands. What he found made his heart stop. It was a wooden box, about the size of a book, wrapped in oiled cloth. The wood was old but well preserved, carved with intricate designs that spoke of careful craftsmanship. Samuel's calloused fingers traced the smooth surface, feeling the weight of mystery and danger in his palms. His hands trembled slightly as he unwrapped the cloth. Inside the box was a letter, sealed with red wax, that had somehow survived the years underground. The envelope was addressed in elegant handwriting, "To whoever finds this truth." Samuel sat back on his heels, staring at the letter. In all his years of digging graves, he had never found anything like this. The smart thing would be to take it to Sheriff Morrison, or maybe Reverend Collins. But something about the letter called to him, whispered to him like the wind through the cemetery trees. He broke the seal. The letter was written on fine paper, the kind that cost more money than Samuel saw in a month. The handwriting was shaky, as if written in great haste or terrible fear. As Samuel read the first lines, his blood ran cold. "If you are reading this, then I am dead, and the truth dies with me unless you act. My name is Jonathan Whitmore, and I was murdered by the man this town calls a hero." Samuel's eyes widened. Jonathan Whitmore had been the town banker 15 years ago. He had supposedly died in a riding accident, thrown from his horse during a storm. The whole town had mourned him as an honest man who had helped countless families keep their farms and homes. The letter continued, "Judge William Crawford killed me because I discovered he was stealing money from the bank to pay his gambling debts. I have proof hidden in my study, behind the false panel in the east wall. Crawford made my death look like an accident, but it was murder, plain and simple. Samuel's hands shook as he read on. The letter detailed how Judge Crawford, who was still alive and still the most respected man in Willowbrook, had been embezzling funds for years. Whitmore had discovered the theft and was planning to expose Crawford the very next day. Instead, he was found dead on the muddy road outside town, apparently thrown from his spooked horse during a thunderstorm. I managed to write this letter and hide it before Crawford's men came for me. The letter continued. I buried it where I knew someone would eventually dig, praying that someday someone would find the courage to seek justice. The evidence is still there in my old study. Crawford thinks he's safe because I'm dead, but the truth has a way of rising from the grave. Samuel felt his world spinning. Judge Crawford was the man who had presided over Martha's funeral, the man who had shaken Samuel's hand and offered comfort in his darkest hour, the man who still sat on the bench every week, deciding the fates of men and women across 3 counties. The letter ended with a desperate plea. Whoever finds this, please don't let my murder go unpunished. Crawford has grown bold in his crimes. If he's not stopped, he will destroy more innocent lives. The evidence is behind the east wall panel in my study. My house still stands on Elm Street Tits, painted blue now with white shutters. Crawford had it sold to cover his tracks, but he never thought to search for what I hid. Samuel folded the letter carefully, his mind racing. The smart thing, the safe thing would be to pretend he never found it. Judge Crawford had power, influence, and friends in high places. What was Samuel Murphy compared to all that? Just a gravedigger with dirt under his fingernails and calluses on his hands. But as he looked around the cemetery at all the graves he had dug, all the final resting places he had prepared with his own hands, Samuel thought about justice, about truth, about the fact that Jonathan Whitmore had been denied both. He thought about Martha and how she had always believed in doing what was right, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Samuel carefully placed the letter in his jacket pocket and finished digging Mrs. Hartwell's grave. But his mind was already working on a plan. He knew the blue house on Elm Street. The Hendersons lived there now, quiet family with 3 children. Samuel had done some odd jobs for them over the years. Mr. Henderson was a fair man who might listen to an incredible story from a simple grave digger. That evening, after Mrs. Hartwell had been laid to rest and the mourners had gone home, Samuel walked through the dusty streets of Willowbrook. The town looked different somehow, as if the letter in his pocket had changed the very air he breathed. Gas lamps flickered to life as shopkeepers closed their doors for the night. Children played in the dusty street, their laughter echoing off the wooden storefronts. Judge Crawford's imposing house sat on the hill overlooking the town, its windows glowing warm and yellow in the gathering dusk. From the outside, it looked like the home of a respectable man, but Samuel now knew the truth that lurked behind those welcoming lights. Samuel knocked on the door of the blue house on Elm Street. Mrs. Henderson answered, wiping flour from her hands on her apron. Her face lit up with a genuine smile when she saw him. Mr. Murphy, how nice to see you. Tom's just finishing up in the barn, if you need to speak with him. Yes, ma'am. I do have something important to discuss with him, if he has a moment. Tom Henderson was a practical man who had moved to Willowbrook from Kansas 5 years earlier. He had purchased the blue house without knowing its history, drawn by its solid construction and reasonable price. Samuel found him in the barn, mending a bridle by lamplight. "Evening, Tom." "Samuel, good to see you. What brings you by?" Samuel took a deep breath. "Tom, I need to tell you something that's going to sound impossible, but I need you to hear me out before you decide I've lost my mind." Tom set down the bridle, giving Samuel his full attention. There was something in the gravedigger's voice that demanded respect. Samuel pulled out the letter and told Tom everything about finding the wooden box, about Jonathan Whitmore's confession, about Judge Crawford's alleged crimes. Tom listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious with each word. "That's quite a story, Samuel," Tom said finally. "And you're asking me to let you search my house for evidence of a 15-year-old murder. I know how it sounds, but Tom, you've lived in that house for 5 years. You know every inch of it. Have you ever noticed anything strange about the east wall in the front room? Any panels that seem loose or different from the others?" Tom was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then he nodded slowly. "Actually, yes. There's a section of wainscoting that's never sat quite right. Mary's been after me to fix it for years. I always figured the wood had warped, but what if it was designed to be removable?" 20 minutes later, Samuel and Tom were kneeling in the Hendersons' front room, carefully prying at a section of the east wall. The wood panel came away surprisingly easily, revealing a hollow space behind it. Inside was another oiled cloth package. Tom's hands shook as he unwrapped it. Inside were bank records, correspondence, and a ledger book filled with Jonathan Whitmore's careful handwriting. The evidence was damning and detailed years of theft, forgery, and embezzlement, all meticulously documented. "Sweet Lord in heaven," Tom whispered, "it's all here. Every stolen dollar, every forged document. Whitmore really did catch him." Samuel felt a mixture of vindication and terror. They now had proof that Judge William Crawford was a murderer and a thief. But they also had a problem. Crawford was still the most powerful man in 3 counties. "What do we do now?" Tom asked. "We take this to someone who can't be bought or intimidated," Samuel said. "We take it to the state marshal. But getting the evidence to the state marshal wouldn't be easy. Crawford had eyes and ears everywhere. They would need to be careful, smart, and above all, they would need to stay alive long enough to see justice done. The next morning, Samuel arrived at the cemetery as usual, but his routine felt like a performance. He went through the motions of his work while his mind raced with plans. He had arranged to meet Tom that evening to discuss their next move, but as the day wore on, Samuel began to feel like he was being watched. It was probably his imagination. Who would suspect a simple gravedigger of uncovering of murder? But the feeling persisted, a prickle at the back of his neck that made him look over his shoulder more than once. Around noon, Sheriff Morrison rode up to the cemetery. Samuel's blood turned to ice, but he kept digging as if nothing had changed. "Afternoon, Samuel," the sheriff called out, dismounting from his horse. "Sheriff Morrison," Samuel replied, not looking up from his work. "I heard you found something unusual yesterday, something you shared with Tom Henderson." Samuel's shovel stopped moving. There was no point in pretending now. Someone had talked, or someone had been listening. In a town like Willowbrook, secrets had a way of traveling fast. "I found the truth," Samuel said simply. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Sheriff Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Samuel had known him for years. He was a good man, honest as the day was long, but he was also practical, and he had a family to protect. "Samuel, you've stumbled into something dangerous. Judge Crawford has been the law in this county for 20 years. He has friends, influence, power. Even if what you found is true, it is true. Even if it is, proving it won't be easy, and trying to prove it might get you killed." Samuel finally looked up, meeting the sheriff's eyes. "So, what are you saying? That I should just forget about it? That Jonathan Whitmore doesn't deserve justice?" "I'm saying that sometimes the cost of justice is higher than a man can pay, and sometimes," Samuel replied, "the cost of doing nothing is higher still." That evening, Samuel didn't go home. Instead, he made his way carefully through the back alleys of Willowbrook to the Henderson house. He found Tom waiting for him, the evidence packages hidden in a flour sack. "Morrison came to see you, didn't he?" Tom asked. "Word travels fast in a small town, too fast. We need to get this evidence out of Willowbrook tonight. I have a cousin in the capital who works for the state marshal's office. If we can get the evidence to him, how the night train. It leaves at midnight. We put the evidence on the train, and by morning it's 200 miles away from Crawford's reach." It was a good plan, but Samuel knew it wouldn't be easy. The train station would be watched. Crawford's men would be looking for them. Still, it was their best chance. They waited until 11 o'clock before making their move. The streets of Willowbrook were dark and quiet, most of the townspeople long asleep in their beds. Samuel and Tom made their way carefully toward the train station, keeping to the shadows and avoiding the main streets. They were almost there when Samuel heard the sound of horses behind them. He grabbed Tom's arm and pulled him into the narrow space between two buildings. 3 riders passed by, moving slowly and deliberately. Even in the darkness, Samuel could see they were armed. Judge Crawford wasn't taking any chances. "We need another way," Samuel whispered. Tom nodded. "The freight yard. There's a loading dock behind Murphy's store. We can get to the train from there." They made a wide circle around the town, approaching the train station from the east. The freight train was already there, black smoke rising from its stack into the star-filled sky. A few workers moved about, loading cargo and checking the cars. Samuel and Tom waited until the workers moved to the far end of the train, then slipped out of hiding. They found an empty freight car and quickly stashed the evidence inside, hidden beneath a pile of canvas tarps. "How will your cousin know to look for it?" Samuel asked. "I sent word ahead. He'll be waiting at the station in the capital. The evidence will be in the marshal's hands by noon tomorrow." They made it back to town without being seen, but Samuel knew their troubles were far from over. By tomorrow evening, the story would be all over the territory. Judge Crawford would know his secret was out, and he would be desperate. Desperate men did desperate things. Samuel didn't sleep that night. He sat by his window, watching the streets for any sign of trouble. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, he heard horses approaching. Judge Crawford himself rode up to Samuel's small house, accompanied by 2 men with guns on their hips. Samuel had expected this moment, but his heart still hammered in his chest as he opened the door. "Mr. Murphy," Crawford said, his voice smooth and pleasant as always. "I believe we need to have a conversation. I've got nothing to say to you." Judge, "Oh, I think you do. I think you have quite a lot to say about letters and wooden boxes and conversations with Mr. Henderson." Samuel stepped out onto his porch, closing the door behind him. If this was going to end badly, he didn't want it to end in Martha's house. "The evidence is already gone," Samuel said quietly. "By now it's in the hands of the state marshal." "You're finished, Crawford." The judge's pleasant expression never wavered, but something cold and dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Evidence can disappear, Mr. Murphy. Trains can have accidents. And gravediggers, well, gravediggers sometimes fall into their own holes." "Kill me if you want," Samuel said, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice, "but it won't change anything. The truth is out now. Jonathan Whitmore's truth." For just a moment, Crawford's mask slipped. Samuel saw fear there, and guilt, and the desperate calculation of a cornered animal. "You have no idea what you've done," Crawford said, "what you've set in motion. This town needs strong leadership, order, stability. Without me, Willowbrook would fall apart." "Maybe," Samuel replied, "but at least it would fall apart honestly." Crawford raised his hand, and Samuel thought his time had come. But before the judge could give the order, the sound of approaching horses filled the air. A dozen riders appeared at the end of the street, led by a man wearing a state marshal's badge. Tom Henderson's cousin had worked fast as the marshal and his men surrounded Crawford and his companions. Samuel felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. Real, honest hope that justice might actually be possible. The trial took place 3 months later in the territorial capital. Samuel testified about finding the letter and the evidence. Tom Henderson testified about the hidden panel in his house. Experts examined the bank records and confirmed their authenticity. Judge William Crawford was convicted of murder, theft, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to hang. The night before the execution, Crawford asked to see Samuel. Against his better judgment, Samuel agreed to visit the condemned man in his cell. "I want you to know," Crawford said, "that I never meant for it to go as far as it did. Whitmore was going to ruin me over some missing money. I just meant to scare him, but you killed him instead. It was an accident, the storm, the horses. I never meant for him to die." Samuel looked at the man who had terrorized his community for 15 years. He felt no satisfaction in Crawford's downfall, no joy in his approaching execution, just a quiet sense that balance had been restored to the world. "Maybe you didn't mean to kill Jonathan Whitmore," Samuel said finally, "but you meant to steal from the bank. You meant to lie to everyone who trusted you. You meant to let an innocent man's murder go unpunished. Those weren't accidents, Judge. Those were choices." Crawford had no answer for that. Samuel returned to Willowbrook and to his quiet life in the cemetery. The townspeople treated him differently, now with a respect that made him uncomfortable. He was no longer just the gravedigger. He was the man who had brought down Judge Crawford. But Samuel knew the truth was simpler than that. He was just a man who had found a letter and decided to do the right thing. Sometimes that was enough to change everything. On quiet mornings, when he worked alone in the cemetery, Samuel sometimes thought about Jonathan Whitmore, about how the dead banker had trusted that someday someone would find his letter and seek justice on his behalf, about how truth, like the bodies Samuel tended, had a way of rising to the surface eventually. And sometimes, when the wind rustled through the oak trees and the morning light slanted golden through the branches, Samuel could almost hear Martha's voice telling him that he had done well, that justice and truth were worth fighting for, even when the fight seemed impossible. Especially then, the cemetery was quiet again, the way Samuel preferred it. But it was a different kind of quiet now, the silence of buried secrets, but the peace of truth finally told. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, when justice calls, you know what to do.